First of all, I want to say a massive thank you to everybody that's been tuning into the podcast and following the journey so far. It's crazy to think that this podcast started about 2021, 2020, and it was a bit of an imposter syndrome getting it off, getting it running. But the inspiration at the time was really just to create meaningful and insightful conversations, and that's still the mission. So if you're someone here and you are enjoying what we're doing, you appreciate what we're doing here, I want to ask you just for one free, very simple, easy favor, and that would be to just subscribe to the channel. My promise to you is to continue to raise the bar and continue to create and deliver conversations that can truly inspire and create some change. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode. So, for those who may not know you, could you share a bit more about your background, who you are, and why your work is so important?
Brilliant. I'm happy to. First of all, Moses, thank you for having me today. And I'm on your podcast. It's extremely amazing, the things that you do and the work that you've been doing. We've been speaking.
Appreciate it.
Even prior to this and over email and so forth, about just the impact, the purpose, and everything I like to. And I'm happy to be here and hopefully can contribute something that might be quite meaningful. Fantastic. But for myself, who I am, what I do, generally speaking, I guess, wear quite a few hats, but it's what's relevant for today in itself. My name is Christian. Yeah. That's the first thing. And I'm a qualified therapist, and I'm also a mentor for men. Been a therapist now, qualified since 2023. Okay. But the journey to get in there probably began a lot earlier. I'm sure we'll probably get into that at some point. Generally speaking. And one of the reasons why I guess I really value the work that I do and the convictions behind, I guess, my principles and things like that as such, is by shaping narratives that contribute towards, better outcomes, especially in the lives of men, for men independently, before we think about their, before we think about the external output into the lives of others. I really focus primarily on how can we help men to build their own internal world, their own internal affairs, and then from there they can build out the things that they have responsibility over, within this context anyway, that we're speaking and discussing. So that's the work I guess I do therapeutically with men. It's not just therapy, it's also mentorship. It's not just mentorship, it's also teaching. It's not just teaching from a Christian lens, it's discipleship. And through there, we're just changing narratives to really just contribute towards better outcomes going forward. And that's, I guess, in a nutshell, some of what I do with men.
Okay, brilliant. But yeah, I think we spoke earlier about your journey. You said you qualified in 2023. Yeah. What kind of led you to where you are right now? What got you into therapy, being a therapist, and what kind of really just ushered that journey for you?
Great question. You know what? Being a therapist for me, it's evolved over time, generally speaking. My first real draw to therapy was all the way back in 2017/2018. Okay. By the time I was a student doing my undergraduate degree, which was in human resources and international relations.
Okay, very different.
Very, very different. Yeah. Very, very different. The only real commonality from human resources is the people-facing element of things. Yeah. So during that time, I was leading my university fellowship. And in leading my university fellowship, as you'd imagine, I had interactions with quite a lot of young people. I say young people, but really and truly were the same age, more than anything. And they had gone through a lot of experiences in their childhood, in their teen years and adolescence, that was now shaping their current world and also influencing, I guess, their decisions, especially as it pertains to how they had perspective of the future, especially things that were quite just egregious as it pertains to, abuse, bullying, and then kind of, that manifesting into issues like anxiety, depression, addictions, you name it. So that was the first, I guess, real base of wanting to do some work that was quite therapeutic, because in leading, I was doing pastoral work, but I was thinking, you know what, I'm quite good at this naturally, and listening to problems, identifying issues and providing solutions from like the Bible in itself. Yeah, of course. But now I was thinking some of these things seem to have a greater impact that required more support beyond let's just pray. Beyond maybe going a fast, beyond maybe perhaps just be in church. It was really kind of persistent in that regard. So that was the first thing that drew me into therapy. And then from there wasn't actually, you know what? One of the common traits that I'm seeing for a lot of them is in the area of their fathers. Yeah. Now that's when it drew to men. Okay, cool. For work towards maybe perhaps helping men become more receptive to their children's needs, become more present. Then actually, you know what undoing the things I'm trying to do. And then over time, we just kept on evolving, really and truly, from students to families to fathers, and now holistically more to men. But all those different things are still kind of immersed in the work that I do. But yeah, that's, I guess, the evolvement over time.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I guess, right, understanding like the inner the inner landscape of like the modern man.
Yeah.
I guess from your experience, like working with men, what do you think is the core emotional wound that most men are carrying?
You know, what's crazy is over the month of November, this one just gone, I was doing therapy with men literally for the whole month. And there was quite a number of different themes and different conversations that were coming up as it pertains to the core wound in itself. That was kind of tracing from the questions and the discussions. I think I came up with 7 altogether. If I can remember them, that'd be great, but we'll see. So there was the emotional wound, there was the spiritual wound, there was the father wound, there was the sexual wound, I think there was the ministry wound and marriage. I can't remember the 6th one, but these were all common themes in the conversations that I was having, things that I was experiencing with the men through therapy. I guess what seemed to be the most persistent was, number 1, the father wound. I think the lack of real intimate interaction with fathers in childhood, the impact of that in later years isn't accepted or embraced enough. And I think for a lot of men, that now lingers into stuff like not really feeling accepted, not feeling heard, not feeling valued, not feeling as if I had an example to show me visually who I'm supposed to become. And then that can also be, I guess, widened when we look at the lack of maybe perhaps mentorship or role models or biblical examples or community leaders to kind of say, hey, this is how you become a man. These are the things that men do. This is who men are. But rather we're just left to figure it out by ourselves, especially now when life begins to have a greater demand
for you to be a man.
For you to be a man in different ways, because now it's not just about my father wasn't there to teach me how to do a tie. You know, now it's okay, cool. Like, how do I manage a household? You know, what do I do actually when my wife is stressed? What do I do actually now when I don't know what to do because work isn't coming as quickly as I thought it was going to be? You know, when the fairy tale of, you know, primary school, secondary school, university, and then work doesn't transpire in the way that was promised to me, what do I do then? So I think the lack of fathers has been the most consistent wound that I've seen in the work that I've been doing myself anyway, personally.
I think that's quite interesting actually, because I think there is this idea of like there is a crisis in masculinity. And for those hearing, they're thinking, oh, this is a narrative that's been pushed around. But I think there is a real struggle in men understanding what it means to be a man in the modern world, right? I think that the narrative so far is that's been pushed by, like, I say more like red pill and stuff like that, is what does it mean to look like a man? So that's kind of having all these like possessions, resources, which are great, and I think they are imperative aspects to your masculinity, right? But I think it's so much deeper than that. And like you mentioned, but without having that father figure, it does challenge a lot of men to understand, because children learn, you know, your parents always say, do as I say and not as I do.
Absolutely.
You know, but the truth is that children do what you do and not what you say. They actually learn from observation.
Absolutely.
And rather than just through, you know, verbal communication.
Absolutely.
They take their schema, their framework of how life works and how the feminine and masculine work from their parents. And I guess if you're having that one missing aspect, it does contribute a lot to, I guess, the challenges of modern men. I think it's also interesting, like, because I grew up with my dad, but I didn't grow up much with a mother figure or a consistent mother figure, and I think that's affected me in different ways. But in hearing like the father figure as well, I think sometimes you can have a present father, and they do a great job in one aspect, but sometimes they don't equip you with the tools needed to navigate, because sometimes they're still holding on to quite a hegemonic sort of traditional like ideology of masculinity, which is quite caged. But do you see that this happens? I don't know the demographic you work with, but do you see this as more case with the father figure in the black community, or is it across the board?
A lot of my work, generally speaking now, definitely demographic-wise, is within the black community. That tends to be the reach that I have at present time. But in the work that I've done previously within organisations, it was widespread, generally speaking, and beyond that. So that would go also into different communities, generally speaking. And so it's not just it's not just an isolated issue to the black community in itself. And so I think the one consistent pattern, however, is the one where that you use yourself is observation. even down from young up until now, one of the ways in which boys and men still learn is not just through curriculum, it's through observation.
Okay.
And I've noticed when that lack of absence is present, it's been filled by something. It's been filled by different voices. And a lot of those voices these days, like you mentioned, is the red pill culture. You know, especially in some of the work I used to do, let's say, for example, not just men, but within schools, when I was working with the education system, in mentorship in that particular regard, when I would ask, okay, cool, some of these boys, who do you look up to? Who is a vision of a man that you'd aspire towards? And it's celebrities. And they're not all terrible celebrities, generally speaking, but naturally because of the image that celebrities portray, they're leading towards the definition of masculinity being centered around acquiring possessions.
Yes, of course.
Or having some figure of amount in your bank account, or being associated with a particular type of women in itself. So it was across the board. And I think that was more evidenced in some of the schoolwork that I've done, that these voices actually have been filled, generally speaking, in a different way. So yeah, it's not just a black community issue in that regard. And it's not only past a certain age. You know, these things were present from as primary school ages. Now we're talking year 5, year 6 to secondary school, year 7 through to year 11, and some of the work I've done in colleges and so forth. So
of course.
You're consistent across the board, unfortunately.
Yeah. Do you feel like amongst men then that like trauma is kind of carried as a badge of honor? I was listening to a podcast from Cam Newton. I think it was Jason Wilson. Yeah. Talking about how I guess sometimes trauma in the black community and across men as well can be seen as a badge of honor. It's like, you know, the idea is like I grew up in the ends. I grew up in. I had no dad. I had no X, Y, and Z. And sometimes they still hold in that to that identity as the only way they can sort of rationalize being a man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously not all statements can be objective, of course, naturally speaking. Of course. I think there are instances where there are those who, I guess, really identify with the experiences that they've gone through and they make that their personality. You know, they make that kind of, you know, their objective perception and how they view the world, interact with circumstances, interact with opportunities, interact with other men, interact with women, interact with just generally society in itself. And that can begin to really be a badge of honor in that way. But I think more than anything, what it is really underlying is a cry for help. I think any cry for any vocalization of anything you've gone through, most of the times we would perceive that to be, okay, cool, this is someone that's celebrating where they've come from in a negative way. But I see any promotion of terrible experiences as also an invitation to say, hey, look, this is what I've been through. Please show me some care. And how I tend to respond to situations like that myself when someone is kind of, you know, celebrating experiences that are quite negative and have had a real kind of, you know, impactful a measure on their world, generally speaking, is with curiosity. Rather than saying, okay, cool, that's what you've been through. What you've been through, how has it formed you? Why has it taught you? How does this kind of, you know, limit you in a lot of ways? Because I think for a lot of guys that have gone through experiences of that nature, they don't tend to see the self-limiting element of going through things of that kind of, you know, capacity. And yeah, it goes back to what you were saying earlier on. It's kind of like, this is where I'm from and therefore this is where I'll always be. But rather when you ask questions, you allow them to think beyond the experiences themselves. That's what I found anyway.
Yeah, I feel like when you mentioned there about like, this is where I've come from, I guess there is also this added narrative to like trauma, which is also associated to your level of masculinity. It's almost like the more you've endured, the more masculine you are. And I guess as well, then there's an added layer to that, which is for a lot of men, the added layer of their trauma in association to their level of masculinity can create a sense of hyper masculinity.
Absolutely.
You know? But do you feel like, I guess the question I'm going to ask is like, how much do you feel like hyper masculinity is affecting these men in terms of how they deal with their emotions, deal with their past and deal with their trauma?
It's a great question. I think what hyper masculinity would tend to take you out of being very much in the present. Yeah,
because I feel like it's exacerbated with black men. You know what I mean?
Again, given some of the work I've done across the board in itself, and I know right now most of my work, like I mentioned, is with black men. But I've definitely seen it within different communities, generally speaking, especially when we think now to the older generation of men within particular communities. I think especially when it's centered around hypermasculinity, mostly when you think about the definition behind it or the actions behind it, it's centered around predominantly provision, stoicism, and just really being macho in certain ways.
Yeah.
Some of the work that I do with men, given the age range in itself, the hypermasculinity tends to kind of center itself around avoidance, not being present within your emotions. Generally because at the stage and age that some of the men I'm working with now are, they aren't really in positions where they're having to provide as frequently or as consistently as the older generation, just by reason of age.
Okay.
They may find themselves maybe perhaps in homes and households whereby because of parentification, because of maybe perhaps fathers not being present, they're having to provide and contribute towards finances in the home and things like that as such. So they're taking on responsibility in different ways. But I think when we start looking at the real definition behind hypermasculinity, in a lot of ways is, like I was going to say earlier on, it's a lack of relationship with the present. It's very much living future orientated. What I mean by that essentially is a lot of it centered around, I have no time to be emotionally present right now. I have more time to know how I feel. I have no time to kind of, care or have concern about this. All that I need to do is to lock in because tomorrow will thank me. That's how I see hypermasculinity being really presented in this day and age in itself. So it's less about, I'm providing now, but it's that, hey, listen, about 5 years' time, this locking will thank me and everyone else will do so. But then that's to the detriment of your current relationships.
Okay.
That's to the detriment of your current mental well-being. And any kind of, principle that you build presently will become extremely difficult to undo later.
Yeah.
So you actually set yourself up really for failing, for rejection later on, thinking that your family, your wife, your kids would thank you 5 years later down the line. But what they needed from you, I got this from one of my friends, wasn't presence in the essence of going to the shop and buying gifts, but what they needed from you was presence as it pertains to your person being very much, within being around, sort of thing. So yeah, generally speaking, I think how I'm seeing hypermasculinity play out a lot more these days is this term, lock in. Lock-in is amazing.
Yeah, no, it's true. It is that, yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. We get your results, but I think a lock-in that really separates you from the present time in itself can be dangerous if you're not careful. And I think that's why a lot of men don't realize they're falling into hypermasculinity, because they're thinking that hypermasculinity is going to be this bravado, this macho, egregious kind of approach where you're rude and disrespectful. Some guys are like that, but generally speaking, you will see not all personalities come across that way, but you're still setting yourself up for some form of disappointment later down the line anyway.
Of course.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about stoicism.
Yeah.
And I guess that is quite connected to that stoicism narrative. What are your thoughts on just like, again, I guess how dangerous is, I think a lot of values to stoicism, right? Being able to like control what you can control, be in control of your emotions, be quite grounded as an individual.
Yeah.
But then that lock-in mentality, you see it across the board. A lot of men are just like you said, don't have time to consider their emotions. What would you say are the repercussions of that?
Yeah, I think, like I said, it costs you. The one value I think every single man needs that I don't think we value enough is relationships. And relationships, we tend to think or approach them as being feminine.
Yeah.
But relationships just in different capacities, generally speaking, relationships with mentors, with brothers, with friends, with sisters, within the context maybe perhaps of church or your spiritual space, wherever it may be, we need relationships. I think with stoicism, one of the dangers that can kind of follow through from that is this real regard of isolation, of internal fixation, that everything that I do must come from our own internal conclusions. Everything that I do must come from our own internal calculations. And there is no need for anybody else to input into what's happening or give me a different perspective or outlook. And don't get me wrong, there is a real need to have internal discipline as it concerns the voices that you're allowed to influence you. Naturally speaking, you shouldn't fall into the influence of everyone generally kind of giving you advice and input and therefore being led by the opinions of many. Generally, that's just not a good position to be in. But I think the danger, however, is when you begin to live and lead your life in a very isolated manner. You now set yourself for a real danger. So I guess the cost for a lot of men is not realizing the value of input, just the value of somebody else calculating your decisions with you and seeing where their contribution could take you and how much further could actually take you. So I think the main cost that I've seen is relationships, man.
Yeah, it's like that saying, if you want to go quickly, go by yourself.
So, if you
want to go far, go with others. And I think that a lot of men, they sort of sacrifice relationships and connection for the hustle and the grind and the lock-in.
Yeah.
I guess there are seasons for that, right?
There are. Even myself right now, I get it. Like you said, if you want to go, if you want to go quickly, go by yourself. Like, there are some things that, they have to get done quickly. So I fully understand, it's just about calculating, I guess, the distinction required for what's needed to be done independently. And I guess a lot of that is more centered around duties, but life in itself, that can't be done independently. Just living life, it can't be done in silo.
It's interesting because as I'm getting older now and I'm seeing my dad, he was the definition of just work. As he got older, and he recently had a stroke last year, and I've seen how his life has changed and the absence of work. And now I'm seeing him sort of scurry for relationships. And I think it's just like, again, that thing of the sacrificing of relationships for the delivery of like, to get a result, you make more money, X, Y, and Z. But then as you get older, I think what people don't remember how much money you made. They remember how you made them feel and the memories you built with them. I think memories are priceless. There's an idea that I want to share with you, like that. Do you think that modern men are becoming more insecure? So many men lack purpose, inspiration, and they struggle to make human impact. So men are struggling to actually really connect. And the stats tell us that over 50% of men who take their own lives have no previous record of like mental health diagnosis. And the issue is because at some point they try to connect, but then feel a sense of rejection, and then they isolate. And with a lot of men are more rational, more logical in our nature. So it's not a case of I'm just feeling down. It's a case of I can't control my environment. What do you see to that?
It's a good question. I thought there's a couple of questions within that shit in itself. The first one around being men becoming more insecure. When you mention that word, obviously, I think even in answering the question, I want people to hear me, not be offended by that word.
Yeah, of course.
It can come across as if it's offensive. But I think when you look objectively at the society that we're in right now, whereby everything is visual and is presented. You go on you go on Instagram, and you never know what you're going to see when you go on that app. You will never know. Someone is celebrating the engagement, someone is celebrating launching a ministry.
Of course.
Someone is celebrating a child, buying a house, launching a business, and a lot of those different things there. It would be deceptive to say that has never made you feel some type of way.
Of course.
Generally speaking.
Of course,
And so maybe perhaps won't use the word of insecure to kind of, again, like I said, to try to avoid the offense, generally speaking. But I think when we look, and then especially when we teach men that it's the external validation that defines masculinity, it's going to cause some form of wound to occur within. It's going to cause some form of questioning of self to occur, or it's going to cause some form of motivation that's not purely defined to begin to spring up. Now it's a matter of you're finding yourself in competition with people that are posting that you don't even know. You're finding yourself now in competition with people that you have never met. Now you find yourself hurrying your own dreams and aspirations to try to meet up and to try and make it seem as if you're doing something, generally speaking. And lo and behold, you probably are doing many amazing things according to your own timeline outside of social media. But because society, because these different platforms are only ever really showing the highlight reels, and instead what's happening behind the scenes, you now begin to think, I need to do more. That's insecurity. So the word insecurity in itself may not present itself as being, I know this is what it feels like, but in your thought perception in itself, independently, that's really showing you where you may find yourself. So in that regard, I'd definitely say men are finding themselves to become becoming a lot more insecure.
In a sense, yeah.
They're in. What was the second part of the question?
It was to do with the idea that men are currently struggling to connect, be inspired, and have purpose. And over 50% of men who do take their own lives had no previous mental health condition or diagnosis. They've tried to connect, but then they feel a sense of rejection.
Yeah. So that one is interesting because there's definitely truth to a lot of that. And I think a lot of that truth definitely centers around the lack of inspiration, the lack of connection, the lack of relationship. I think probably more the lack of relationship rather than lack of inspiration.
Okay.
Reason I would say that myself is I've seen that a lot of the things that we as men try to connect on the basis of in themselves quite flawed. In that we'll try to connect on the basis of business, on the basis of what do you do, you know, how long have you worked in the particular field, you know, what's your next project and things like that. Very external factors. It's as if we're trying to build business acquaintances less than friendships.
Yeah.
If we're looking at it from that monetary kind of world. If we look at it from maybe perhaps a spiritual church world, which myself and you share in common, it's more centered around trying not to relate on the basis of what ministry you're part of, what you do in church, how long you've been doing that for, and things like that as such. And it's good, of course, to have things which we have in common. But I think what we need to center around a lot more when men can begin to feel rejected is if I don't perform to the same measure as you, business-wise, then before you've said anything yourself, I already feel rejected. Disqualified, because I have nothing to bring to the table. You're into business, I'm not. So
we have nothing to
talk about. But the reality is we probably do have a million other things to speak about, but because we meet each other on the basis of what our LinkedIn says, what our Instagram says, we already feel as if we're already in this connection. And then we look at that in the spiritual sense. It's like, cool, you go to that church, I go to this church. We're in different spaces, therefore we have nothing to talk about. So a lot of the rejection that men may be facing is less vocal. It's more just through assumption. That because you face yourself in this particular way, I then myself can't connect with you as a result of that. And that then leads, of course, to the feeling of being isolated, they're not being inspired, because inspiration is not just something that's built internally. I think it's fueled also through relationships, fueled also through other people encouraging you, speaking life into you. But the reality is this: people that don't do the same thing as you can still speak into you, can still encourage you, can still be kind of, you know, come alongside you in that regard. So yeah, a lot of the rejection I think is centered around what we try to build relationship on the basis of, and what we ourselves in our preconceived judgments make of others. Or Moses does podcasts and it works in the particular field. We have nothing in common. But that could be your best friend.
Nice.
If you just said hello and found something else to ask and to inquire about, and then you can connect through there. So I think that's where rejection comes from a lot of men. It's actually assumption, not through vocalization. Of course, not dismissing the instances whereby there are those who have tried to connect and made those steps forward, and it hasn't been met, you know, with open arms. Can't dismiss that, of course, in itself, but I think that's the main thing I'll say I'm seeing a lot more these days.
I think there's two things there's a couple of things you mentioned there that kind of reminded me of two things. I guess it's the concept of loneliness and the kind of the male loneliness epidemic, and that usually sometimes loneliness is the lack of, I guess, itineraries in your calendar in some sense. But there's a further element to that where loneliness graduates into the fact that you feel alone because no one has really met you. So you have shown a side of yourself, which you said is the business, and this is why I offer and provide. But not actually connecting on a true DNA level in a sense. But then it's like the added layer of there is this, again, a kind of a hyper masculinity in friendships. There's a discussion. There's a writer called Alain de Botton, and he talks about how that we as a generation are better at relationships, I guess opposite sex relationships, and for those who rather than friendships, and that basically we conflate our level of intimacy, especially for men. We only consider intimacy can come from the opposite sex, through sex, through connection, and that's the sort of thing. So like when you then try to make male bonds, there is this kind of air of this could be a bit gay. Connecting too much feels a little bit uncomfortable because I guess we've sort of pumped up masculinity so much to the point that sexuality becomes fragile. Now, if I'm trying to make friends with you, I gotta be like
gotta be cautious. Just let you know that this just I'm trying to be your friend.
I'm trying to be your friend. That's what it is. That's what it is. It's like how to be your friend, and if it's like not a common goal or common thing, like I guess relationships are built from, I guess, commonalities and shared experiences. But then it's like, when you have that individual, for that individual that's out there who doesn't know anybody, who hasn't met anybody, they've moved to a new city, X, Y, and Z. I can only imagine that individual feels like, especially the man feels like, how do I make the connections? I guess that's where women sort of, I kind of give them their props because they can connect over absolutely anything. Women are so much more adaptable than men are. They are able to connect and find purpose in absolutely anything. Whereas us, it feels like we need to sort of like, everything needs to feel like a reason. I'm speaking to you because you do this, this, and this, and you can help my life in this, this, and this way.
Yeah.
And we sort of becloud that in the idea of, oh yeah, this is my friend. But deep down, the truth is, he just wanted a friend. But he had to make some sort of
calculations first. Making the approach.
Yeah, exactly. I guess moving a bit more into like your therapeutic practice, right? And I guess the expression of emotions from the average man. There's this idea of normative male alexithymia, which is in a colourful term, which is emotional blindness. A lot of men actually struggle to make the connection between brain and mind and feeling. I guess, why do you think so many men struggle to really just name what they're going through and how they're feeling?
Great question. I think what I'll say to that, first of all, I think it's the consistent, I guess, consistently, I guess, bringing them down in that way is one thing that doesn't help, as I find in myself anyway. A lot of the times when I'm working with men within therapy, one of the things I say to them is that it's your duty to speak, it's my job to clarify.
Okay.
And one thing I always try to present to them is that, emotional literacy, especially this day and age where you can borrow language from everyone, anywhere. You can borrow emotional language, what I'm speaking about. From TikTok, from reposts, from reels and things like that, as such, you begin to define yourself in particular ways. It's not very helpful and useful. I think when I think about the world of therapy and psychology in itself, these are not just, popular spheres. These are real disciplines that people spend their time studying to learn intellectually and to engage with. And you can't just become an expert because you've watched a few videos after a few hours and things like that as such. But I guess going back into actually answering the question itself about men, one of the things I guess I say to men to try to help them to make the connection between heart and mind, or mind and feeling, is you may not necessarily know the language in itself, but you know the experience. And you're the only person that's the expert in your experience. You know exactly what you went through, and you know what you went through isn't great. Generally speaking, there's no need to say that what you went through has caused repression and now you're functioning this way, this is maladaptive, or you're now an avoidant and things like that as such. A lot of men know their thoughts, generally speaking, and knowing their thoughts, they know their patterns. And how do I know this? Is one thing that you ask a man, one I like to do anyway, ask is, what are you thinking? So in therapy, I already ever ask men, what are you feeling? I ask more, what are you thinking?
Yes.
Because in thinking, you will find exactly the underlying or emotions that are connected to that. Because if there's one thing that man is going to do, he's going to think. Generally speaking. There's one thing he's going to do is calculate. Is try to be decisive. Is try to ponder. Try to kind of reason and find different ways in which he can come to certain conclusions. And so how then would they make the connection between mind and feeling is by knowing, okay, cool, bro, I've been thinking about it to make more money. Okay, so you're feeling like you're under pressure right now. Now, that feeling of being under pressure, okay, that might be leading you perhaps to resent in your relationships. How are things happening romantically? Or maybe perhaps that's causing you to feel a bit frustrated with your current role. Do you feel satisfied therein? Actually, now I've been thinking about moving to a different company for the last 2 months, but I feel like I haven't got the qualifications. Okay, so you feel like you're not good enough. So now we're naming through thoughts, generally speaking. So men are not void of feelings. It's just that they've got the literacy. They use different language to it. And I've found that through asking questions about thoughts, you begin to unveil and identify the feelings attached to it. And for a lot of men, those feelings will not be in the expression of, I feel sad, I feel low, I feel upset, I feel depressed, I feel angry. It will be, I feel like I'm under pressure. I feel like my world is just spinning right now. I feel like I'm juggling a lot of different things. And in naming those things, now you can begin to name emotions that are more maybe perhaps socially accepted. But yeah, for me, how to connect, I guess, the mind and the feelings for men is I ask questions about thoughts and less about feelings. Because I think feelings evoke a sense of pressure and like vulnerability. And now it's, I don't know. But if I ask you, what have you been thinking about this week? I'll probably have like 5 different things roll off their tongues.
That's a very interesting deduction because it's true. When you ask a guy how's he feeling, he can very really very, very rarely, vocalize it.
Properly, yeah.
We've asked him what he's thinking, and I guess as well, like when I think about, even when I think men know it too, when we speak to women, we never really ask them what they're thinking. We think, how do you feel?
Yeah.
What are you feeling? And I think in response as well, women should ask men, what are you thinking?
What are you thinking? Yeah.
More time, you can deduce what he's feeling out of that. And I think it's interesting as well, because when you're talking about how men know the experience, when it comes to situations like things like heartbreak and loss and stuff like that, men experience things a lot more physically than women do. And it's funny because in my time, I guess in practice, the interesting thing was that men use words like, I feel like my balls have been crushed. I feel like I've lost my sense of pride.
Yeah.
I can feel my heart is.
Yeah.
They sort of, if anything, they vocalize what they think sometimes in physical expressions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's interesting when you put it out in that way. I guess there's one thing I kind of want to sort of share with you, and I get an idea, and your idea of this is that I think, what do you think about modern day therapy and how well it's adapted to men? So historically speaking, a lot of modern day psychotherapy is very much, I guess, has been constructed to gear towards women. Historically anyways, more women are in therapy. I think that the statistics is like 66% of women are in therapy. And of those 66%, therapists tend to be more women than they are men. So you can suggest that there is somewhat of a leaning towards or a bias of psychotherapy leading towards
women more.
To women more.
Yeah.
And I think, as you're mentioning there, right, like the idea is this, is like male depression or male, I guess, mental conditions are not being treated like men. So the idea is that men are being, a lot of time, are being encouraged to feel loved and to feel accepted, when truly they want to feel powerful and capable. So then a lot of men, they don't see their emotions as something to feel, but something to solve. I guess in your practice now, from what you said, it seems like you understand that. But do you think there could be more steps in place done to sort of accommodate men in psychotherapy and how they approach therapy?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think even down to the profession itself, if I tell you some personal statistics from when I was studying, generally speaking, when I was on my first, the certificate or the masters, when I was in the masters cohort for my qualification, I was the only black male.
Oh wow! Okay.
On the course,
yeah,
and I think I was.
It was me, to be fair, yeah,
literally,
yeah.
I was the only black male, and I was altogether I think there was 4 or 5 men on the whole course, and I think there was 60 people altogether, or just under, maybe like 58 or something of that nature, 56, and so the ratio, as you can do in your own head, maths is not my strong point, but it's a lot more women.
Either.
I think in accessing therapy in itself, from a professional point of view, I think there needs to be greater representation within the field. I think more men should feel courageous enough to want to be therapists, to be within the helping organizations. I think that would then begin to break down the stigma of therapy being only this feminine kind of industry and discipline that only women go towards. In general, the therapist, when I was looking for a therapist initially, all the therapists I ever came across, predominantly when you look on any website, it leans, like you're rightfully saying, towards it being more women. So I think first and foremost, when we see representation from professionals being men, then that can be the beginning of kind of overturning how men view therapy themselves initially. For myself, for example, like I was mentioning to you earlier on in November, I was giving up free therapy to men as a way to allow them to access and to break that stigma in itself. When I was asking questions around, why have you ever been reluctant about therapy and so forth? Some of the things I would say wasn't just centered around like cultural competence and cultural understanding, but was actually around, gender and race were significant factors for kind of resisting them for going towards therapies. I don't see people.
What do you mean by that?
I don't see people that look like me.
Okay.
Like, I want to talk to someone. Therapy is very popular these days, but every time I see a therapist, they don't look like me.
Okay.
In gender, first of all, and maybe in race.
Yeah.
Second to that, and then other factors being age and faith and location and things like that to such. So if we're talking, I guess, about how we can make therapy more welcoming and more accommodating to men, I think I should start from, first of all, the professional element of things. Of course, how that happens is quite difficult, because therapy, as much as it is a very helpful professional, it's not the most lucrative.
Okay.
I would say that. It's not the most lucrative.
Tell me twice.
especially when you're working for an organization. Generally speaking, it doesn't tend to be. It's emotionally burdening. It's something that you really have to do because you have the heart for it. Something that you really have to do because you've got the discipline and the compassion to help. But I really hope, if any man is listening that's interested in therapy, so we need more of you in the industry that will help more men to feel like they can go towards accessing it. And then I guess in speaking to the men who are considering, or maybe perhaps have pondered, in regards to therapy in itself. I know there's different stigmas, centered around it, whereby therapy is just diagnostic and your therapist is there to tell you what's wrong with you and to tell you to fix up and things like that to such. Therapy is a breath of fresh air. There's different forms of therapy, there's different modalities, different frameworks in which your therapist will be specialized in. And it doesn't have to be that you go to therapy when you're in crisis. It can simply that you go to therapy when you're curious and you're searching for clarity. You have somewhere you can offload your emotions, someone to just... I have clients that I will spend 50 minutes with. Aside from the hello, how are you, how's your week been? The rest of the session, maybe 35 minutes, it's a straight monologue from them. And I just, can I speak now? Sort of thing. So it's like there's different things.
They're almost waiting to have a space to
literally,
speak. Literally,
like I haven't had this and this is the only time I can do so.
Yeah.
Do you want to say? And I think that can be extremely beneficial altogether.
What do you think about this? Because... So when I started therapy, I started last year. I was a bit reluctant to start it too. My idea was I can somewhat intellectualize my own feelings. I'm hyper aware of them. I can somewhat navigate them. So I don't necessarily need an additional person to come in and help me. But when I did sort of reach that place where I sort of crashed and I really needed to reach out and help someone, I reached out for therapy. Now, the first therapist I was given was a man. And I didn't feel safe speaking to him. Because I was like, he's going to think I'm less of a man. You know what I mean? So then I opted into eventually having a woman. But I guess sometimes, do you think that having someone look like you can also be a challenge too?
Absolutely. I agree. I think definitely I agree with you. And I say that because I had a very similar experience as well myself. Especially in regards to what's called they might think that I'm less of a man. But one of the things that I've learned, and I try to remind myself on a frequent basis to this day and all the days of my life, is actually the greatest strength, the greatest application of strength is to submit yourself to somebody else. And I think in doing so, it's recognizing that help doesn't only come from places that you define as safe. Sometimes it's come from places that you have to be courageous to go into. Like the hardest voice of correction, the greatest correction that you need may come from the person that you're most fearful of. And that's healing in itself. When another man can tell you what's happening in your world. Especially like I was saying earlier on, for a lot of men, the wounds going to therapy tend to center, not all, but some tend to center from the father wound. And that father wound can then get adopted into how we define or view other, male figures in positions of leadership or positions of influence in our different worlds in that regard. So it can definitely have a detriment in causing that internal reluctance first initially. But I think if you can push yourself to overcome that, even after 1 or 2 sessions, you realize that actually this is more helpful because one finding out, not at the dismissal of therapists or women can provide to you, but more helpful maybe perhaps in allowing you to get into more depth in the conversations that you truly want to have. There are some conversations that, maybe perhaps motherly touch and the feminine approach may be helpful. But when you're in the beginning, when you want to start to speak about some real stuff, you recognize that, you know what?
A man understands a man.
I'm saying, so maybe perhaps let me take it this way. And that's exactly what I found in some of the conversations that I've had over the last, just in my time in practice. Generally speaking, especially when, it's stuff around like being sexually abused, sort of thing. There is that reluctance to speak to anyone about that altogether. But I think when
something like that, you might not want to talk to a woman about that.
There we go. You get, especially when it depends on, of course, who has been the perpetrator.
Of course.
But generally speaking in itself, I found, there are certain conversations that you probably find you'll be safer with. It's not safer in that regard, so you may feel more comfortable in speaking to with a man. But I know it's an initial barrier in itself.
Of course.
It can be overcome.
Moving on to like faith, and how purpose can, and having a higher purpose can affect a man's ability to, I guess, manage his emotional state. So there's an idea, right, that a man with a strong enough why can endure anyhow. And there's a story of some research in the Blitz during World War II, and that there were a large cohort of men that were, I guess, referred to there were they were sectioned essentially, essentially catatonic for many years before the Blitz. Now, after London, as London got attacked, the readily abled men were already at war, and the women had already, offered their services, and there were so many ambulances and fire engines that were unable to. There was no one to man those, to drive those. And I guess during the Blitz, when there was a demand needed, they found that these catatonic men that had been in this state for years were able to sort of get up, put their shoes on, and they were actually driving these ambulances and these fire engines.
Wow.
And I guess it's that idea that if you can give a man a purpose and a means to accomplish it, he can crawl through glass with a smile on his face. Now, I guess the question is, how much have you seen in your practice does having a higher purpose, having a faith, have a relationship with God, influence a man's ability to navigate his emotions and to get through negative or, I guess, difficult times?
Yeah, greatly. And greatly I say so in regards to myself also, but I think I can also say negatively in a lot of ways.
Okay.
And I think the great element of things, I think generally speaking, is the recognition that, in the faith that I follow, being a Christian, is recognize that, that the things in which we do are not always according to our own human strength.
Okay.
There's a grace that's provided. There is a kind of a spiritual empowerment that you're given to help you to endure through some of the most difficult situations and circumstances. And I can attest to that, generally speaking, whereby there are, it's like, for example, there are particular seasons of life that maybe perhaps, rest in a natural physical sense is required, but then there are seasons where you are literally living off grace, that supernatural kind of endowment, empowerment that literally takes you from one chapter to the next, if I'm using just, spiritual language in that regard. So there is that positive element whereby you recognize that, hey, the things I'm called to do, the things I aspire to do, I'm empowered by God to do them. And I think that's a real faith practice that I've seen work supernaturally in my life as well. But I think the negative to that can occur is when we as humans don't intermarry the spiritual dynamics of our life and the just general human design of who we are, because the nature of the composition of man was designed by God. And God is very much aware intricately of where your limitations are as a person.
Okay.
God is intricately aware of the needs that you have in regards to your physiology, generally speaking. God knows that, yes, you can fast as much as you want, but at some point, you need to eat.
Yeah.
God is very much aware that you can...
It's like Elijah, the story of Elijah.
Yeah,
he was like running from, was it?
Jezebel.
Yeah.
And then took a nap.
Yeah.
After his nap, said, eat, for the journey is long.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So God knows the limitations and the frustrations that come in, and he puts those things in place to remind you that you yourself are not God, to remind you that you yourself have need to be dependent in that regard. So sleep is a form of worship because recognition that I have dependence. Rest is a form of worship because recognition that I'm dependent on God. So that's why when I say negatively, I think sometimes it's in over-spiritualizing rather the empowerment of God. Came to the detriment of recognizing that actually, you know what? I'm not regulating myself in the way that I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
And in not regulating myself in the way that I'm supposed to, by having, breaks in place, by having disciplines in place, by having habits in place, what that is doing to myself is now, like I was saying earlier in the very beginning, impacting my relationships. And not only that, also it's impeding upon my own personal emotions.
Yeah.
Because now, generally speaking, all I feel as if the satisfaction of life comes from, like you mentioned it, that itinerary being full. It comes from other people being blessed.
Yeah.
It comes from other, from whatever form of ministry you're in, being satisfied and being concluded. Now there isn't a real sense of presence and self-awareness as concerns, no, but everyone else is happy and blessed. but how are you?
Yeah.
You know, sort of thing. How naturally are you doing independently within yourself? So yeah, like I mentioned, there's a positive, and that yes, you're graced to do things.
Yeah.
But when you over spiritualize that being graced, it can definitely come to the detriment of you not knowing how you're regulating yourself and what's happening within your own internal world in different ways. Now you're wondering why you're so irritable.
Yeah.
Now you're wondering why you're so exasperated. Now you're wondering why you're short with people. Why emails themselves fluster you. Small tasks are not enjoyable as much anymore, and different things of that nature, I would say.
Yeah, the importance of rest.
Of rest.
You know, I guess it's something that's not very, I guess, popularized in in pop culture, which is if you rest, you're lazy.
Yeah.
But not understanding that rest is a part of God's design. Of worship. To say, God, I trust.
I'm learning.
You know, God, I trust. And with a lot of men, it's like there's no time to rest. There's no,
Same.
you know, there's no time to sleep. There's no time to slumber. You know, you just got to jug. You got to work hard. You got to, you know. But no, that's an interesting point. I guess something you mentioned about over spiritualizing. Do you think, I guess, how historically, maybe it's modern times. I guess this is now calling, I guess, your experience as a minister, but also then as a therapist too, the over spiritualization of mental disorders. You know, sometimes you can't pray it away. What are your thoughts about that?
You know what's crazy? I just came across a story on TikTok the other day. Shout out to TikTok. Of very, very morbid story. However, it was this I can't remember the exact condition that he had, but this young man had a particular condition. It may have been schizophrenia. I'm not too sure. Where his parents over a period of time tried to, like you said in word, verbatim, tried to pray it away, sort of thing, encouraging him that you're not hearing voices, like we'll pray for you and things like that, to such.
Yeah.
Long story short, it led to him stabbing and killing his mother.
Oh wow.
And stabbing and hurting his father.
Wow.
His sister was some within the narrative as well, but I can't quite recall exactly what happened to her. And the reason why I mentioned that is, unfortunately, within different spiritual spaces, not just Christian spaces, but any space that kind of identifies with having some form of spiritualism, we don't take, or maybe how to speak within my context, some cases seriously enough until we see things like this occur.
Okay.
And I won't be one to dismiss or to kind of divide the kind of spiritual force element that can still be present within those areas.
Yeah, of course.
For a person being overwhelmed in that regard. But I think there are some things you recognize actually that have to be medicated in more ways than just prayer, and not demonizing those institutions, those industries, or those pathways of supporting people. No, those pathways are all means of regulating.
Yeah.
They're not negotiating. You're not agreeing with demonic work, but we're regulating it in a way in which we can support a person to still have that autonomy. Because the main thing really and truly that we're looking for here in dealing with spiritual forces that are wicked is trying to restore someone's autonomy. And if the way that we can achieve someone's autonomy, regaining control over their mind, regaining control over their function, over their relationships, over their peace and things like that as such, may be achieved in ways in which don't give testimony and credibility to the church, but it's still useful, I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Because God has given us that wisdom naturally to be able to conduct and to apply in the lives of people. So yes, unfortunately, over-spiritualization in certain cases aren't taken seriously enough until you see morbid things like this.
Yeah.
But the reality is, actually, from some of the work that I do with men in the churches that find themselves in the places that they find themselves in, a lot of them are crying out for help that they feel that they can't bring forward in church. A lot of them are kind of going through things, and I can testify to this myself as well, being a man, having grown up within the church, recognizing that actually, hey, you know what? I've been trying to pray away feeling low for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
It's not working.
Yeah.
This is my third fast.
Yeah.
It's not working. I've been fighting for a particular sin and I've been praying. It's not working. Yeah. And that isn't saying or suggesting that praying itself isn't helpful, that prayer itself doesn't lead to result. But I think when you keep on giving men or anyone really one particular solution without holistically immersing yourself in their world, you make that channel itself a channel of disappointment.
Yeah.
And so now they have this image or conclusion of church or prayer as being an avenue that just leads only to disappointment. But what actually they're searching for is connection, on a human interaction.
Yeah.
You know, there's a scripture in the Bible that I really love. It's from Galatians 6:2. It says about bearing one another's burdens that you may fulfill the law of Christ. You're asking me to pray, but what I need is a conversation with you. And in conversation with you, I can feel more supported, more loved, more seen, and then I can help us maybe to avoid, those morbid realities that can occur in the example that I mentioned, or maybe perhaps in suicide actually occurring in the lives of men. So yes, prayer, absolutely fundamental, helpful, but let's also be immersed in the lives of people in different ways beyond just saying, solve it by yourself in private.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, because I think when you're dealing with these sort of like these, I guess, negative situations in your life, you forget about the action element to the prayer. So as much as you're praying about something, there's a part where you need to do. It's like, I remember growing up, my pastor used to say this thing where people pray for friends. Proverbs talks about how to have friends, one must be friendly. Show that I'm friendly. So it's like you're praying to have friends, but you are not actually friendly. You want to find a husband or something. You're not smiling. You know these little things. It's like, so and when you're saying it as well, it's like, it's interesting because even Jesus himself, right, when he was in the garden, he brought 3 of his friends with him. Yeah. And it's like, yes, he was there talking to God. Yeah. But for some reason, he still felt the need to have people around him. Yeah. And it's like, as much as you might be going through a difficult situation, there is an element whereby other people need to be involved.
Absolutely. There's a story in the Bible that I love that's very contextual to this, is the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. Yeah. And when Lazarus dies and is placed in the grave, the Bible says that there is the stone that's put in front of his grave. And how that miracle we attested to Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, which is the case and is the truth. But if you look at some of the intricate details of what happened to Lazarus' life after that, you pay attention to the people that are around. So in the first instance, before we see Lazarus raised from the dead, we see that actually the first thing that to be done, Jesus said, roll away the stone. So Jesus asked people that were centered around in that particular instance to be the ones to do the hard work of rolling that stone away. That stone was not light. Yeah. That wasn't like a small pebble. Yeah. That was guarding a grave. Yeah. So that required physically capable people to come and do the strenuous work of pushing that thing away. So people got involved immediately from that point on. Then Jesus himself called off a loud voice saying, Lazarus, arise. Lazarus then walked out of the grave. Yeah. But then the Bible says when Lazarus walked out of the grave, he was robed up in grave clothes. And then Jesus said to the people around him, take the grave clothes off him. Yes. So now we see that Jesus himself performed the miracle. In the example that you mentioned, Jesus went before the Father was praying, but he still had his 3 disciples close as his friends, just maybe a few meters away praying behind. In the same instance where Lazarus is raised, Jesus performs the miracle. Glory goes to him. But then it's the people, it's the relationships, it's the therapy, it's the support systems, it's the discipleship that came across to Lazarus to be able to actually help him to come back into full capacity, to come back into mobility, because he was alive by word of Jesus, but to be functional again as a common person within society was the people around that to take the grave clothes off him. So very similar to what you're saying there about it's not just going to be a means of through a spiritual action that you do, but it's the practical things that you follow through with that kind of, combine. So there has to be an intermarriage with the practical and the spiritual.
As I guess looking at Jesus, what could you say many men could take as the example of, I guess, the Jesus emotional life and how modern men should look at their emotional state and how to navigate that as a masculine man?
Wow, so good. I think with Jesus, one thing I love about him is that a lot of especially when we speak about the emotional world of Jesus, is always very public. Yes. There are many a times where the Bible frequently speaks about Jesus withdrew himself to go and pray. So there are certain instances and such situations that you know that you're going to handle in private. Whether that be with God himself, or whether that's going to be within a community court of friends. Yeah. Generally speaking, there are certain issues that you never see me speaking about on the internet. Of course. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So you separate yourself to be able to deal with those. But then Jesus was also very much in tune with his emotions, publicly speaking. The example just mentioned of Lazarus dying, he publicly wept, in that particular instance. When the people were without a shepherd, publicly was grieved. Moved with compassion. When the people were without food and they were scattered, he asked who has food around to be able to provide for them. So Jesus' compassion, Jesus' literacy in that regard was never something that was void of public interaction. He actually valued and experienced and practiced it to people. And so when we're looking at men in regards to how we ourselves can become, I guess, more like that, it's being more willing to evidence those emotions and those feelings in person, in public. You know, for example, church is one of the places in which you find men find it extremely difficult to express lifting up hands or maybe crying and things like that to such. And, you know, naturally you won't see it as much. And again, I'm not going to spiritualize it and say just do it, sort of thing, because I think the resistance behind it sometimes also comes from the work that's to be done in private. But I think essentially the point I'm putting forward here is that there can be an intermarrying, there can be a duality of being privately present with your emotions and also being publicly vulnerable. Maybe perhaps let me change the language, being privately vulnerable with your emotions and publicly present with them also at the same time. Jesus experienced and showed that to us, but I think it begins, of course, with what you do in that private vulnerability and to empower yourself to do it in public.
I think there is something Jason Wilson said about reframing words like vulnerability with transparency. And as you mentioned there, being vulnerable in private but being transparent in present. And it's like saying, okay, these are the feelings that I feel, but I guess releasing them on the world is a different thing. And then also rebranding, I guess, how you process the idea of being transparent, because I think a lot of the time a lot of men see emotion and then see weakness. But saying that actually I'm aware that, like, there's this idea that courage is the attribute of doing the thing, very much being aware that you're scared. Courage is associated to bravery. But bravery is associated to quite a masculine trait, right? So if I'm aware that I have all these emotions, that can be quite scary and can be quite daunting. But at the same time, I don't run from them, but I embrace them, understand them, interact with them, and I'm willing to be exposed to them and then also present them in a healthy way. I think that's a better metric of being a masculine man, because you did the scary thing.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that's a narrative that a lot of guys need to sort of break down in their head, which is that you being transparent emotionally doesn't necessarily show a sign of weakness, but show a sign of bravery. You are not like the men who feel things but run from them, but feel things, embrace them, but still do the thing anyways. You know, I think the difference when you see Jesus is that Jesus was very much aware of the fact, and he made it very clear, Father, you know, if you can take this cup away from me,
please.
You know, being very much aware that I'm genuinely scared to do this thing you've asked me to do, yet I will do it regardless. So I'll embrace my feelings. I will let people know I feel this way. I guess the difference between the man with men and with women, actually, I won't even say that because I want to create a polarized conversation. But I think the difference here is that for the man is that, yes, experience what you're feeling, understand what you're feeling, engage with that, but don't sit in it. Be present with it, be transparent with it, but don't run from it. You know, that's a better metric of you understanding how to navigate emotions in a masculine frame. There's an idea that, you know, a lot of women are looking for men to be emotionally intelligent, and some of us express that with, oh, you need to offload on her, but not necessarily. It's more she wants to understand that you have a grasp of your emotions. You're able to comprehend them, and you can present them within a masculine frame to be like, this is how I'm feeling and this is what I'm doing to deal with it. Here's how you can help me. Don't get me wrong, there are times you do break down and be like, look, babe, I don't know what to do. Help me. But I think it's understanding that it's like you do a better job in your relationships, whether it be familial, platonic or romantic, when you're able to say, look, this is how I'm feeling.
Absolutely.
You're a lot more well adapted to understanding it and engaging with it, rather than just shoving it somewhere deep. And as you mentioned, in the 5 years, 10 years, X amount of years time, it comes back to bite you back in the bum. So I guess, how do you feel like moving forward now, kind of being more solution driven, how do you think men can break the generational cycle of like emotional repression without losing the strength that they considered, that they admired from like their fathers and their grandfathers? Like how can they truly be emotionally mature men / Christian men?
I think, we'll probably summarize a lot from some of the things we've spoken about within the conversation in itself. But I guess if I was to borrow from something I said earlier on, is through the example that I mentioned about thoughts. I think when you take care of your mind and your thoughts a lot more, it will translate into your heart. more clearly. So I think, but I think one of the ways in which men can become more attuned in that regard is by allowing their thoughts world, to lead conversations that they have. And in doing so, I think that builds greater clarity in what they're searching for, what they're seeking for, and feeling safe enough to know that actually, you know what, presenting my thoughts as I'm calculating and processing about how in the world I'm going to get rich in the next 5 years, how I'm going to make sure that nursery fees are paid for the next 10 years. Well, not 10 years, but you know what I mean? How I'm going to get all these things done. The more that you express these thoughts, rather than keeping them internalized, the safer that you yourself begin to feel, the more, support you can receive from those who are around you, like you're mentioning, from the 3 different levels of relationships that you may have, whether that be familial, whether that be platonic, whether that be romantic. By just naming those things, you're allowing yourself to have safety networks, safety mechanisms come into play. And that in itself is a celebration and appreciation of the strength that you've received. Because you won't dismiss your disciplines, you won't dismiss your resilience, you won't dismiss, I guess, your courage and things that you're already maybe attached to. But what you're bringing them into is a partnership in deploying them in a new light. And anything that's new can sometimes feel foreign. Anything that's new can sometimes feel daunting. But I think gradually over time, anything that's practiced frequently becomes normalized, and anything that's normalized becomes easy to do. So I think what we can do to kind of marry the things that we've inherited with what we're trying to do in this day and age, it begins really, I think, at that point, like I mentioned, let your thoughts translate themselves into feelings, and that becomes more normal. And from there, you've normalized a pattern that can really be just recurring in your life in the generation to come, I would hope.
Fantastic. Just one last thing really is, if you could just give like one just very practical, practical psychological framework, just daily habits that one can sort of actionably do, what would you recommend for someone to kind of get started to really just kind of decipher their inner world?
Decipher the inner world. Oh, great question. I think I'll borrow back from what I said earlier on about you're an expert in your experience.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is you may not be an expert in defining what to do about it.
Yeah.
But you're an expert in regards to that you're the one that knows how it feels the most.
Okay.
So how I guess you can practice, maybe perhaps becoming more regulated and becoming more present, especially on the basis of interactions and communication and relationships and things of that nature, is really learn the narrative. Don't just dismiss it. For example, if you grew up, if I speak of myself, in a single parent household with an older sibling, speaking of my own particular example, master what the narrative did to you. Like recognize the patterns that influence you with, the disciplines that are formed in you, the form of pessimism maybe perhaps that's kind of under the waters of your discipline, the fears maybe perhaps that exist as a result of that, the frustrations that easily linger when people ask you questions or you're prompted to do particular things. Learn the narrative of your own story, of your own life. And I think in doing so, on a general daily basis, you begin to identify where it leaks into certain conversations and leaks into certain opportunities. Because, for example, it may be now that you're a working man and you are asked to perform particular duties, but maybe perhaps you tend to avoid hard conversations or avoid management. Where is that linked to? Maybe perhaps it's linked to the fact that any time that I try to perform at home or to give myself over, I was dismissed. So you're having quick kind of assessments of where your childhood, if we speak from childhood here, has influence into your outer world. So I think one of the first things is to learn your narrative and knowing your story, because when people try to tell you things about yourself, they're dealing with the present you. They're dealing with the you they're seeing right now on their screens, on their camera and so forth. But you're presenting yourself in those conversations as someone that has a host of experiences that are not personal to them. But in knowing what influence everything that you have come, can know how to kind of, give them definition for how to support you, how to challenge you, how to expect you to show up. So I guess a daily frequent thing I say is, in learning your narrative, will help to identify the patterns and the systems that are in place day to day that maybe perhaps need to be rewired, retweaked, and maybe perhaps then directed in a different fashion for yourself.
Fantastic. And then would you say that the best practical method that would be journaling? Would it be voice recording? Like how would that individual sort of...
Yeah. I love the fact that you mentioned both of them, journaling and recording, independently. I think it depends your preference. But I say journaling and recording are definitely practical tools.
Okay, fantastic. And I guess just as we conclude, if all your content your tweets, your posts, your conversations, all your social media disappeared off the planet.
Okay.
What's one message you want to leave the world?
One message I want to leave the world. If everything disappeared, I'm not trying to do the spiritual thing.
Yeah.
What would I try to leave behind? I'll say be present.
Okay.
Be present is the one thing I'll say, generally speaking. Be present. Don't just work for the future.
Yeah.
Be very present in every single situation and circumstance that requires you to be present.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Christian. I really appreciate
it. Thank you, man. It's been a pleasure, bro.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Take care.
I've been your host, Moses, and you've been tuning into the King's Speech podcast. You know, the podcast where we have conversations that create agents of change. Again, we're trying to take this to the next level, and my promise to you guys is that with every like, with every comment, with every subscription, my job is to make sure that I can really raise the bar and give you the best conversations possible. So again, if you've enjoyed what we're doing here, if you enjoyed this episode, please do like, do share, and definitely click that subscribe button. And I'll see you on the next episode.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
Brilliant stuff.